While this weapon system is still currently under the radar, no pun intended, of the Western media, one can rest assured that once it starts flight tests in earnest, it will be paraded as Exhibit A in the propaganda indictment of Russian aggression. Therefore, it might be worthwhile to preempt the usual media barrage by placing a spotlight on what promises to be a revolutionary weapon system capable of changing the global balance of power. The Sarmat missile is classified as a so-called heavy ICBM. In accordance with START treaties, that designation is applied to weapons with intercontinental range and launch weight in excess of 100 metric tons. It is not the first such weapon to earn this designation. The earlier R-36 series Voyevoda ICBM, dubbed by NATO as the SS-18 Satan, also belonged to that category and likewise was the target of a focused propaganda campaign. Why else would it be assigned a codename like that? USSR was not the only country to deploy such weapons. US strategic forces used Titan ICBMs for several decades. The controversy associated with heavy ICBMs naturally begs the question, why bother with such weapons? What missions are they intended to accomplish? In the Russian case, at any rate, heavy ICBMs play a specific role. They are the spear tip of strategic nuclear deterrence. Their ability to destroy heavily defended or protected targets, included by anti-ballistic missile systems, guarantees the rest of the deterrent force remains viable. Although the R-36 spent most of its service life under the ABM treaty regime, one has to keep in mind that it was designed with the assumption the US would have widely developed ABM systems, and moreover Soviet heavy ICBMs were part of the reason the US realized in the early 1970s that the Soviet missile capabilities were sufficient to render any US defensive system irrelevant. A single R-36 represented, after all, a 10-warhead rapid-fire volley that no ABM system at the time could hope to counter. It's the realization that ABM systems would be costly, destabilizing, and in the end useless that gave us the doctrine of mutually assured destruction in its mature form. The Sarmat is the child of the post-ABM treaty era from which the US withdrew during the first term of George W. Bush administration, whose main priority, before it was sidelined by the 9/11 terror attacks, was a military build-up in space to the point of making the final frontier a US military preserve. A Sarmat's function is as much political as it is military, as it is intended to send the message that, in the final account, the US is better off sitting down behind the negotiating table in order to create a new multilateral framework of collective security than pursuing impossible dreams of unilateral full-spectrum dominance. Since the US missile defense technologies have evolved over the last several decades, the Sarmat will likewise represent a major advancement over the Voyevoda. Instead of simply presenting the ABM system with a rapid succession of targets with the goal of saturating the defenses, the Sarmat is more subtle. Its approach to the task of invalidating opposing missile defenses consists of a combination of factors. They include the ability to employ multiple trajectories, not only the standard route over the North Pole to the North American continent thanks to the missile's powerful engines and ample fuel load, which account for the bulk of the missile's estimated 170 tons. It can also employ suborbital trajectories which greatly reduce flight and therefore also reaction time. Its 10-ton payload will include hypersonic aerodynamic vehicles, which are considerably harder to intercept, in addition to standard warheads and, naturally, decoys. Last but not least, in order to ensure its survivability, its launch preparation time will be only 1 minute, greatly reducing the likelihood of it being caught on the ground by an enemy first strike. The Sarmat is a high-priority weapon system whose time load has not suffered significant delays. Its initial testing is scheduled to begin later in 2016, with service entry scheduled by not later than the end of 2018, and with all the R-36M missiles still in service being replaced by 2020. The initial free world reaction will likely be the usual barrage of propaganda which inevitably follows every Russian international initiative, though, as in the 1970s, it will be followed by a more constructive Western response that will help restore a sense of global security and stability.
Recent days and weeks have seen several news items pertaining to the future state of the Russian nuclear triad. The scope of modernization plans suggest the role Russia's strategic nuclear forces are to play for Russia's security foreign policy. The scale of Russian strategic nuclear modernization is impressive. President Putin recently attended the laying down of Alexander III, the 7th Bourget-class ballistic missile submarine out of 8 planned, which carries 16 multi-warhead Bulava SLBMs each. 3 of these ships are already in service, and the whole series is to become operational by 2020. It was also announced that the first Pakta heavy bomber flight is to take place in 2020, with the aircraft becoming operational by 2025. In the interim, Russia's long-range aviation will receive several squadrons of 2 160 M2 bombers, whose production is expected to resume in the upcoming years. The Sarmat heavy ICBM research and development has been recently declared complete, and the missile will begin launch testing in 2016 or 2017. The missile's unique capabilities include the ability to strike any target on the planet using multiple possible trajectories. For example, it could be used to strike North America not only by flying over the North Pole, but also using an alternative trajectory over the South Pole, which would render U.S. ABM systems irrelevant. The construction of Voronezh DM over the Horizon Ballistic Missile Attack Early Warning Radars is continuing. Finally, the Russian General Staff announced the development of a system allowing strategic ballistic missiles to be retargeted following launch, which thus far was impossible to do because once the target selection was completed prior to launch, there was no way to alter it after the missile was in flight. This brief outline of current development shows that Russia is pursuing a sophisticated strategy of deterrence. The comparatively small and uniform French, Russian, and Chinese nuclear arsenals are capable of deterring only one threat, namely a nuclear attack on their national territory. The variety of capabilities inherent in Russia's triad means that its national leadership has a range of responses at its disposal and can use its capabilities to deter not only nuclear attacks against its territory, but also conventional attacks against its military targets, including outside of Russia's borders. Syria is an example of what these capabilities mean for Russia. It is no accident that Putin's request to raise the strategic nuclear force readiness level to 95% came when he instructed the General Staff to destroy any potential threat to Russian aircraft or ground facilities in Syria. The Russian military presence in Syria is not large enough to guarantee survival against a concerted NATO attack. 50 aircraft located at a single airbase, even one protected by the S-400, are still vulnerable due to their exposed location and lack of strategic depth. Russian conventional forces could not easily come to Khmeimim's aid in the event of it being attacked by NATO forces. What makes Khmeimim secure from attack is the credible and flexible deterrence posture. What makes the deterrence both credible and flexible is the variety and modernity of Russia's delivery vehicle force, which is not limited to having to launch a multi-warhead ICBM or SLBM, and which can penetrate all current or planned defenses. The credibility of Russia's nuclear deterrence is strengthened by the existence of a powerful conventional deterrent in the form of Caliber and KH-101 cruise missiles. The use of these missiles against ISIS targets was likely motivated to dissuade any countries hostile to Russia's presence in Syria because it demonstrated Russia could use these weapons to retaliate against any attack on Khmeimim. The target state would then have to choose between backing down or escalating, thus risking a nuclear exchange with Russia. If Russia simply had an ICBM and SLBM force, Khmeimim would be a much more tempting target because an ICBM launch would be a disproportionate response to the attack. Russia's strategic force modernization plans indicate that its leadership anticipates Syria-like scenarios in the years to come.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Head of State Summit took place at Tashkent in June 2016. Counter-terrorism operations were one of the main topics of the summit. Chinese experts believe that the situation in Syria needs special attention of the SCO member states because the ISIS terrorist group poses a threat to the security in Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, Russia and some other regions, including the Middle East and the Caucasus. This is why China believes that the SCO member states coordinate efforts over the countermeasures implemented against jihadi groups. Now, some 3,500 Chinese troops are deployed as part of UN peacekeeping missions in Lebanon, South Sudan and Mali. Rumors are circulating that the Chinese leadership is going to deploy up to 10,000 troops in the Middle East as soon as the Chinese military base in Djibouti is ready. Only this base will allow Beijing to deploy 5,000 troops that can participate in operations in the Middle East and North Africa. In this case, it becomes clear why China pushed the counter-terrorism agenda at the recent SCO summit. Furthermore, if Iran joins the SCO, China could get access to logistics centers there. Modern counter-terrorism operations are de facto common military operations with full-scale usage of artillery, military equipment, missiles and warplanes. This is why China needs as much logistics centers as it can get access to if it wants to participate in the operations in the region. In other words, Beijing is preparing to project its military power in the Middle East.